Good evening, constant reader. Tonight, I have a question for the book club. What creature within the Stephen King universe scared you the most? Of course, there are a lot of different ways to define that word creature. My first instinct is to say that Pennywise the Clown, or It, is the creepiest of all. This channel will eventually tackle that mammoth novel that we call It. But today, I want to talk about a different creature. Actually, I want to talk about a different sort of fear. A combination of horror and dread. But it doesn't make you flinch or even look away. I'm talking about the kind of fear that petrifies, so you cannot help but look. You are caught. This is the sort of creepiness I felt the first time I read a short story from his collection Skeleton Crew. So tonight, I hope you'll indulge me, constant reader, as we take a deep dive from the Raft. Most movie adaptations of Stephen King's work fall short. You can say that about most movies that come from books. But with Stephen King, I think there's a particular reason for these shortcomings. Case in point, Creepshow 2 features a film adaptation of The Raft. And it's thrilling and gross and it's exciting to watch, but it does not have the psychological realism that we get out of the original story. And what I mean by psychological realism is that King populates his stories and novels with characters that have internal monologues, even internal dialogues. They have complicated, contrasting feelings. They have fears, they have anxieties, they have ambitions. There's a whole inner world that happens on the page that we don't often see on screen. Allow me to read the first page and a half of The Raft to demonstrate. It was 40 miles from Horlicks University in Pittsburgh to Cascade Lake. And although dark comes early to that part of the world in October, and although they didn't get going until 6 o'clock, there was still a little light in the sky when they got there. They had come in Deke's Camaro. Deke didn't waste any time when he was sober. After a couple of beers, he made that Camaro walk and talk. He had hardly brought the car to a stop at the pole fence between the parking lot and the beach before he was out and pulling off his shirt. His eyes were scanning the water for the raft. Randy got out of the shotgun seat, a little reluctantly. This had been his idea, true enough, but he had never expected Deke to take it seriously. The girls were moving around in the back seat, getting ready to get out. Deke's eyes scanned the water restlessly, side to side. Sniper's eyes, Randy thought uncomfortably, and then fixed on a point. "It's there!" he shouted, slapping the hood of the Camaro. "Just like you said, Randy. Hot damn! Last one in's a rotten egg!" "Deke," Randy began, resetting his glasses on his nose, but that was all he bothered with, because Deke was vaulting the fence and running down the beach, not looking back at Randy or Rachel or Laverne, only looking out at the raft, which was anchored about 50 yards out on the lake. Randy looked around, as if to apologize to the girls for getting them into this, but they were looking at Deke. Rachel looking at him was all right. Rachel was Deke's girl, but Laverne was looking at him too, and Randy felt a hot, momentary spark of jealousy that got him moving. He peeled off his own sweatshirt, dropped it beside Deke's, and hopped the fence. "Randy!" Laverne called, and he only pulled his arm forward through the gray, twilight October air in a come-on gesture, hating himself a little for doing it. She was unsure now, perhaps ready to cry it off. The idea of an October swim in the deserted lake wasn't just part of a comfortable, well-lighted bowl session in the apartment he and Deke shared anymore. He liked her, but Deke was stronger. And damned if she didn't have the hots for Deke, and damned if it wasn't irritating. I won't argue that the plot of this story is anything finer than your typical monster movie. I first read this story when I was 14 years old, and by then I was no stranger to spooky movies. And I already knew all of the typical teenage tropes about pleasure-seeking college kids who break rules and pay the price. The Raft is no different in this regard, except there's something about the complexity of Randy's character that is remarkably different than what we see in something like Friday the 13th or the Halloween movies. Just a few paragraphs into this story, we know the complexity of Randy. He is a young man with a spirit of adventure, but one that is easily squelched. We know that he admires his friend Deke, but he's also jealous. We know that he caves to peer pressure and hops the fence, but he uses that same strategy of peer pressure to urge the girls along as well. And at the same time, while he's doing it, he feels ashamed of his own actions. As a 14-year-old reader, I was seeing glimpses of my already complicated teenage life. For me, King was the first writer to ever illustrate the often perilous bridge that spans between childhood and so-called maturity. But of course, The Raft is not a coming-of-age story. It is a horror story. The four adolescents are all alone. The lake has been closed since Labor Day. It's late October, the last gasp of an Indian summer with winter closing in. Immediately, we get this sense of isolation, and that establishes this underlying sense of dread. But the true terror begins when the creature shows up. A big, oily black thing, a blob, in the waters of the lake. Now, everyone has their own pet fears, whether real or imaginary. Zombies, werewolves, sharks, snakes, birds. One of my more irrational fears is that of blobs. The idea of being digested by a brainless ball of slime was always deeply disturbing to me as a kid. Movies like The Blob scared me as much as they mesmerized me. When I first started playing Dungeons and Dragons, I was fascinated the most by the gelatinous cube, one of the creatures in my monster manual. And I had more than a few nightmares from this short film. It's not exactly a blob, but it is about a ball of recording tape that hunts down this guy, and it eventually gobbles him up. I think it was meant to be a comedy, but as a kid, I did not find it amusing.
I made some fun.
And for the record, I did not even eat Jell-O. I didn't want to watch it wiggle. I didn't want to see it jiggle. I did not want Jell-O on my plate. I said the word brainless, but that doesn't mean that blobs aren't cunning. In our Stephen King story, we don't know exactly how intelligent this blob of ours may be. But it does seem to do some problem solving from time to time, and at the very least, it detects the presence of our hapless college kids. It is a predator, the teens are the prey, and once it locks onto them, it will stay under or near the raft until the prey has been obtained. The first victim is Rachel. Our characters sense that this blob might be dangerous, but they are not sure if it's pollution. They don't know what it is. They just know that they probably shouldn't touch it. But Rachel becomes hypnotized looking into the blob and is suddenly pulled in. This horrible moment is described in vivid detail in the story, and it conveys just how dire things are for the remaining 3 characters who are trapped on the raft. But here's the thing. Many readers, myself included, feel sorry for these 3 characters, but not too sorry. And here's why. Before Rachel perishes, there are moments when Laverne, the other female character, is petty and rude to Rachel, as she seems in competition for Deke's affection, even though she's supposedly dating Randy. Here's an example. "I want to go back now," Rachel said. "So go," Laverne said. There was a look on her face, the clarity of absolute triumph. "I'm afraid," Rachel said. "Of an oil slick?" Laverne asked incredulously, and then laughed. But after Rachel is absorbed by the blob, Laverne isn't laughing anymore. In fact, she screams so much, Deke slaps her in the face. There's another scene later on in which Randy elbows her in the stomach. The young men in this story are prone to violence. Therefore, considering Laverne's mean girl vibe and Deke and Randy's abusive tendencies, none of these characters possess that final girl innocence that we see in horror movies. So we're worried about them, but not exactly rooting for them. Deke is the next one to die, and for me, this is one of the most memorable and agonizing deaths in all of King's works. It happens during what is meant to be a moment of action and decisiveness. Deke is just about to jump off of the raft and swim for shore. His plan is to then drive for help and save the day. But here is what happens. "I'll make it," Deke said, and started toward the edge of the raft. He got 2 steps and then stopped. His breath had been speeding up, his brain getting his heart and lungs ready to swim the fastest 50 yards of his life, and now his breath stopped, like the rest of him, simply stopped in the middle of an inhale. He turned his head, and Randy saw the cords in his neck stand out. "Paunch," he said in an amazed, choked voice, and then he began to scream. He screamed with amazing force, great baritone bellows that splintered up towards wild soprano levels. They were loud enough to echo back from the shore in ghostly half notes. At first, Randy thought he was just screaming, and then he realized it was a word. No, 2 words. The same 2 words over and over. "My foot!" Deke was screaming. "My foot, my foot, my foot!" The thing had his foot. The black blob thing latches on to just a little bit of Deke's heel. And Deke is hooked. The blob will not let go. It pulls his foot, then his leg, and eventually all of Deke is squeezed between those boards. Randy and Laverne are helpless spectators. No matter how hard he tries, Randy cannot free his friend. By the way, you may have noticed that throughout the story, Randy is nicknamed Poncho and Deke is nicknamed Cisco. This is inspired from the 1950s Western TV show, The Cisco Kid. Sort of a south-of-the-border, Robin Hoodish adventure series with a leading man and his loyal sidekick Poncho. It lasted over 150 episodes, but on the raft, our dynamic duo is no more. And to compound the agony, after Deke's death, Randy realizes that he and Laverne missed their chance to escape. While the blob squeezes poor Deke through the crack in the raft, Randy and Laverne could have jumped off into the water and swam for shore, but they missed their chance. At this halfway point in the story, with only 2 survivors left, we see that Randy, despite his flaws, is not heartless. If he were one of the more brutal characters of Stephen King, he would have tossed Laverne overboard, sacrificing or actually murdering her in order to save himself. But instead, Randy and Laverne comfort each other. That comforting leads to something more. A lot of people have a lot of things to say about Stephen King's sex scenes in his books. Come on, Randy and Laverne, this is when you have sex? When there is a blob just waiting for you to make a mistake? By the way, in the original story, this scene is consensual. In the movie, not so much. She's asleep. Gross, Randy. Randy promises to keep an eye on the creature while he and Laverne get it on, but he's easily distracted and things do not end well. By the age of 14, I had already seen enough slasher movies to know the old trope. If you have sex in a horror movie or a scary story, you are bound to die. But normally what happens is that the amorous couple is unaware of the monster/psycho. They are caught by surprise during or after their lovemaking. In the sex scene that takes place on the raft, the characters know that they are being observed, they are being hunted. Imagine making out with your sweetheart while trying to keep tabs on Michael Myers. But then again, what do I know? Not much, apparently. Because in an article from Salon.com all the way back in 2001, during the month of September, Yale professor Dr. Peter Salovey explains the psychology behind a behavior sometimes called end-of-the-world sex. When faced with death, humans want to feel alive. To quote Salovey, "It's not so much sexual arousal as it is wanting the security and the closeness that it represents." So, there's the psychological reason for the love scene, but for this couple trapped on the raft, security is an illusion. In the film version of The Raft, the black thing latches on to Laverne's hair, and the slime devours her face. Then, in a burst of panic and self-preservation, Randy jumps into the water, outswims the blob, and then stands on the shore, claiming victory over the monster. It's a moment of hubris that he will quickly regret, as seen here. For a horror movie fan, this ending is fun in a malevolent sort of way. But King's original resolution is more somber and more haunting, and in some ways more brutal. Randy kicks the doomed, faceless Laverne into the water, but he's in shock. He doesn't use this terrible moment to save himself, as he does in the film version. He just stands there, yelling. King's dark sense of humor shows up in these 3 sentences. Randy screamed, he screamed, and then, for variety, he screamed some more. Now Randy is the last one standing, and the story's pace moves with dreamlike rapidity. The night passes, he struggles to stay awake. He is sometimes drawn into the hypnotic colors swirling in the oily blackness of the blob. He does not win out in the end. Randy's final words are worth noting. First, he begins to croak the lyrics from "School Is Out," a song by Gary U.S. Bonds. It's a rollicking rhythm and blues song from 1961, and the perfect song for youth to celebrate the end of a school year and the beginning of summer. But in this story, our college kids are back in session. They don't want summer or their youth to come to an end. And in the end, these characters never get a chance to grow old. The final words of Randy are not song lyrics. Instead, it is a question to the monster lurking underneath the raft. The question is, do you love? And as a young reader, I always thought this was a very odd ending. As an older reader, I actually appreciate it more. Do you love? In George Bernard Shaw's play, Man and Superman, the main character says, "Oh, the tiger will love you." There is no love sincerer than the love of food. At the end, Randy acquiesces. He stares into the hypnotic colors, hoping, foolishly I think, that the spell will take away any pain once he falls in the water and succumbs to the black thing. But do you love is also a question that connects other stories in the Skeleton Crew collection. Be on the lookout for the phrase, "do you love," in the short story Nona, as well as the last tale in the book, a story called The Reach. Well, that about wraps up my thoughts on The Raft. I would love to know what Stephen King creature has unsettled you the most over the years. Which ones do you most fear going bump or splash in the night? Leave a comment and let us know, and as always, thank you for watching and listening and subscribing to the Stephen King Book Club.